Well, Uncle Dan.
Hey there.
I'm just now realizing that we may have accidentally put together a real bummer of a show.
What do you mean?
Well,
I think it's all. Look, you're talking about cartoons.
A sadistic cartoonist, yeah.
Everybody loves that.
Yeah.
I think we need to bring it down a little bit.
Oh yeah. Okay. So we should dial down from the joyousness of Jack.
Topic,
Jack.
guys.
Yeah.
So of course, our beloved Uncle Frank is here from across the way at Thank God I'm Atheist to fill in for that lazy so-and-so Douglas,
who's definitely not still in jail. It's definitely not that.
Yep.
So don't nobody worry.
We're not even close to our Patreon goal of $250,000 for the week. That might help with that. So let's come on, people, step up. But Frank has a certain expertise from something he's researched in the recent past. And it's very germane to the kind of things we talk about here on this show. So we thought we should finally broach this subject and talk about it.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks. I mean, I've already been chiming in and everything, but thanks for having me on the show.
Well, glad you're here.
We're so happy to have
great.
you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how to start with this? Basically, I'm going to be talking about the topic of teen suicide.
Yeah.
The highly uplifting and entertaining topic of teen suicide. And specifically about how it sort of plays out in the state of Utah.
Right.
And how you can't escape, the Mormon Church's potential role in sort of us having incredibly high teen suicide rates. For anybody who doesn't know, which most listeners probably don't know, Utah is always in about the top 5 states as far as the percentage of our teenagers, or I guess you should say youth aged 10 to 17. They kind of go down that low in age.
Wow.
Who end up take their own lives. Right. And it's obviously an incredibly complex issue, and I guess a little bit of background. The reason that I kind of know a lot of this off the top of my head is because a few years ago, I made a documentary for our local PBS affiliate, Channel 7 here in Utah, PBS Utah, I guess is what they're really called, and made a documentary about teen suicide, specifically because of this incredibly high teen suicide rate. And so, you produce a piece of media in the state of Utah that's going on to a TV station that our state legislature
hates
and already controls a bit of their budget. There's some sensitivities that you immediately have to take as far as your approach to it. You can't come out swinging on the Mormon part of the story.
Right. Which is it's telling a joke without a punchline, right?
Right. What is interesting?
Rewrite Moby Dick without ever mentioning Moby Dick, essentially.
Right. Yeah, without that depressing whale in the middle of it.
Without the whale subplot.
Well, and what is interesting is the issue turns out to be a little bit more complicated than I figured going into it, and much more complicated than what was getting. Whenever I told a friend or an acquaintance that I was working on this, my circle of people, mostly ex-Mormon people, right, immediately go, oh yeah, Mormon Church, string them up, go after them, right?
Right.
And what's interesting is that there are, while Utah, and this was my moment when I kind of realized, oh wait, this is a really tricky issue. Really tricky issue, because it's not just Utah that has a really high suicide rate in this region. It's the entire Intermountain West. And you could look at that and go, well, still the Mormons, right?
Yeah, it's still in the Mormon sphere.
Right. But it's also Colorado has a high teen suicide rate. And, Idaho, which, obviously has a big Mormon population and everything, but up into Wyoming and Nevada. And so when you start to dig into it, it's there are researchers at the University of Utah who are very interested in this topic as well. And one in particular has really started to put together this connection between life at high altitude and sort of a prevalence for depression or other sort of mental illnesses, sort of any kind of
I'd
chemical
heard that
imbalance.
before, and I didn't know how much stock to put in that.
I would put a fair amount into it. This one particular researcher, he does PMRI research. That's the sort of, you can watch an MRI in action, right? You can watch chemicals moving about the brain. And so he does research specifically on, he performs it on rats, of course. And he deprives the rats of oxygen in order to...
What an asshole.
In order to simulate... He doesn't kill them, but he simulates or causes hypoxia, which is shortness of, or the condition of not having enough oxygen in your blood. Right. And so he's simulating, and he's not going like crazy and suffocating them. He's trying to simulate just high altitude. Yeah. And so he'll put them in these chambers, and he does like sea level, oxygen, and then he sort of reduces the amount of oxygen. And I don't know exactly how you test to see if a rat is depressed, but he has...
Well, it's probably like dopamine or something, right? Dopamine levels or...
Yeah, and I think he actually did talk about, like, I don't think we have him on camera talking about this, but like that the rats do have very specific activities that they like to engage in, right?
Right.
And that they will lose interest in those activities. That manifesting a very common sign of depression, which is a loss of interest in your hobbies, right? And there were other things. It's
and they get into like goth stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Their wardrobe changes. But no, so he's been doing this research, and his whole premise is that depression is essentially a metabolic condition, right? And that if you could then reverse that effect by he's doing research with creatine specifically, right? Where which you can just get at GNC, and like young like bodybuilder types, right? Will take this supplement, right?
Right.
And it ends up increasing the oxygen level in the blood, and they have really promising early research that shows that this is potentially a really good treatment for depression at altitude. But of course, like I said, it's an incredibly complex issue, and it's not...
I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is that the church is off the hook entirely.
See, I think they aren't, because they chose this high altitude destination, didn't they?
Oh, the Lord led us here for a reason.
Yeah.
No, obviously, one thing, like the church does a really good job of starting us down the road of feeling excluded or a loss of community, right? If you don't fit in the Mormon, if you're not perfectly sort of Mormon,
right,
you're excluded if you're part of this Utah community, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you don't come running to Salt Lake and make new friends, right?
Yeah.
And so the way that I see it is that it's just kind of this web of different things, because there's also research that shows that activity in a religious setting is actually it's actually
can be
beneficial.
positive.
Yeah, it's beneficial for your mental health. But the key to that is if you fit, right? If you if it is working for you, then it is working for you. Right. And you get all of those protective factors that come from involvement in religion. Right. But the moment that you're no longer a good fit, and all it has to be is you're growing up gay. Right. And excuse me, I grew up gay. Mark, you grew up gay in the LDS
we
church.
both went through. We both went through knowing we were in an out group before we were placed in that out group.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
but now
by
I
our
feel
in-group.
like I'm in an out group because I didn't grow up gay. I feel like you guys are excluding me.
Well, but your
But it
favorite
has a
color is
toll.
purple, which is a strange choice. So,
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
I'm mostly gay, except
Yeah.
for that whole liking, being attracted to guys thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but
All the other bits, sure.
it takes a serious toll though on a young person.
Definitely.
And there's a lot. So I don't know that there's something specific. When we lay this responsibility at the feet of the Mormon Church, right? It's not something that is completely unique to the Mormons, and I think that we should remember
Sure.
that
Yeah.
it's conservative religious communities across the board who are not cool. Well, to be honest, conservative religious communities, because it doesn't matter if maybe one is like cool on one issue or not. You always have to fit their perfect little mold in order
Right.
to be a good member of their community.
Yeah.
And so
I think,
tie that in
Frank,
with,
if I can interrupt, I think what makes Utah kind of unique is it is unlike most states. It is so hegemonic in a monolithic religious
exactly
group,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that definitely would exacerbate the whole thing. And then, there's all of the other issues that can lead to a young person wanting to just, no longer be.
Right.
And, bullying is obviously a huge one. And then what was the other one? Oh, we did in the film specifically look at this one group of Mormon mothers. That's how I kind of worked it in. I found this group of Mormon mothers who were supportive of their LGBTQ kids. You've probably talked about them on this show.
Are they the Mama
The
Dragons?
Mama Dragons. Yeah.
I don't know that have we addressed the Mama Dragons?
I don't think so.
specifically? I don't think we have.
Well, there's this awesome group.
We don't talk about the good guys very much on this show, Frank.
Okay, well, I'll bring
Yeah.
in some news about the good guys.
Yeah.
This is a group of Mormon mothers who, against the teachings essentially of the church, have decided that they're going to make their child their priority, right? It's not the
Right.
church, it's their child, right? And they're going to love their child through this adjustment into this identity that they've come and told them about, right? And so in the film we have a young trans woman, and we talk to the Mama Dragons and we get some perspective from them. And now the not that this is specific to Utah, of course, but the trans community faces a suicide rate that's 10 times the national average. And so when you look at the idea of acceptance of a person for who they are, right? And the value that has in mental health, and that person's desire to keep on living, we know the challenges that the trans community faces on that issue, right? And so it starts to become really clear the value of a mother just embracing their child for whoever they turn out to be.
Oh my God! Of course,
like.
I think that for a lot of us, I don't know how specifically, our experiences match up, Frank, but my home was not a safe space for me,
right?
Either. Church wasn't. If anything was, weirdly, school was, because I was so successly in the closet that nobody knew, right? Or I told myself nobody knew, but home wasn't a safe space. And if I had if either parent or both of them had been like loving in that way, my life would have been completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the thing that the Mama Dragons are doing, and why it's so, what this is telling about the Mormon community is that it's so revolutionary, right?
Right.
That they
just
would
accepting your child for who they are is an act of revolution.
And women leading it.
Exactly.
Doubly revolutionary in Mormonism. Yeah.
I hadn't actually thought of that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But you're totally right. And so there's a lot of things that you can start to kind of line up, but there's no real that's the silver bullet that if the Mormons just changed that one thing, right? Or if we change this one thing in the state of Utah, maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. that all of a sudden we would our suicide rate would go down. There are other things to lay at the feet of life in the Intermountain West that could explain the regional problem, right? Access to firearms being a major issue, right?
Interesting.
BYU football just consistently sucks, and that's got to take a toll on people.
But no, I mean, we have a vibrant gun culture, right, in the Intermountain West.
That's a nice way of putting it.
And so that's obviously a factor, and the state's done a lot. Actually, surprisingly, Utah has done a lot for for funding trigger locks and trying to get trigger locks into the home. And so, I mean, they're working on the issue in a lot of different ways. One of the cool programs that we looked at in the documentary was this thing called it was called Hope for Utah at the time. It's probably expanded because I know that it was a hit. And what it is that it's this program that goes into the schools and they identify the kids at the school who the other kid, they basically do a survey of all the student body.
You told me about this. I thought this was so brilliant.
Yeah. And they take this survey of all the kids, and they have the kids identify who would you approach if you had a problem, or who do you think would be a good kid to approach? One of your
among
peers.
your peers.
Yeah. If you had like something going on in your life and you just needed somebody to talk to, right? And invariably at any school that they do this, a set of names just bubbles to the surface, right?
Because like a lot of kids are picking the same.
Yeah, they're just like Amy over there, and Jimmy over there, right?
Probably Braden. If it's Utah.
McKaylee is really popular.
McKaylee and Braden.
Yeah.
But it's just clear, and it's obvious, right? These are those wonder kids who just like they're smart, but they're also just emotionally
caring,
intelligent kids, right? And so then they take that group of kids and they invite them into this program where they train them on how to respond to their peers if their peers start confiding in them about, thinking about suicide, right? Or just depression in general, right? And then they also put a social worker in the actually it was a social worker, a therapist in the school. So they had a full-time staffer who the kids could just go and knock on his door, right? And just have somebody to talk to who was really safe.
Do you know what makes me crazy? Why don't they? No, okay. I wanted, before I preface that with something, is that we said something about school counselors last week or the week before, Dan, that got a couple emails that we said they were kind of useless. And I think in our in our experience, they were, because they were part of the Utah Mormon Snitch Network. Right. And really, in my experience, they didn't do any counseling. It was just like, here's how you fill out a form for college, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't understand them as available to help you in crisis.
Yeah.
So and I know they do that now, but it's amazing to me, Frank, that this isn't already a thing. That there isn't that person in schools.
And I think though that school counselor, it was such a terrible name, right, for that role, because you're right. It was about getting advice for your future. It wasn't about like, having somebody who was a safe person to talk to about whatever was troubling you, right?
Yeah.
And so they haven't done away with those folks. They're still at the school, right? Yeah. They've just staffed an additional person. And it was part of and the school I'm specifically thinking about is down in Alpine, which is a very wealthy Mormon area.
Yeah, extremely Mormon, right? Probably.
Yeah. But even then, the school district, the school district wasn't the one funding the therapist. It was part of, I think it was Valley Mental Health, surprisingly.
Yeah. Interesting.
But nonetheless, and this would be typical of me, right? And sort of the way that I see the world is that, as much as I would love it to be the Mormons exclusively, Right? But I desperately wish I could just point my finger and blame them. I think that it has to be like all of our fingers pointing in all sorts of different directions.
Totally. Well, so on that subject, I want to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier about the altitude thing.
Oh yeah.
So after the Mormon Church, which it does on the regular, comes out with a particularly hurtful anti-LGBT policy, LGBTQ policy, youth suicide statistically and self-harm goes up.
Yeah.
Now, our altitude didn't change.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I think that's that multifaceted thing, right? Which is, of course, the Mormon Church has a role in this, and of course, they need to be more careful about what they say, right? And of course, they should reform and become loving and accepting, and embrace the gay kids, right?
Yeah.
Of course they should. And it would save lives. It absolutely would. But that's absolutely right, Mark. Like,
yeah,
I think that
it's
the truth
fine
of the matter
to blame
is
them for the stuff that is identifiable. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the thing is that people are depressed all over the world in any place. It may be that we have a higher instance of it because of the altitude and other factors, but what you can do in those situations is not be a dick, because, especially in a place where people are going to be more prone to depression and more prone to, or less able to modulate their own emotions and help themselves. The last thing anyone needs is to be made to feel less than, is to be made to feel bad.
Yeah.
By the people that should be loving them the most.
Yeah,
and that's the situation that we have here, is that any like increased depression is going to be made worse by the fact that their parents are not accepting and
their peers. And that's the problem of a monoculture, like a lot of Utah communities are religiously and socially and culturally, is that you may not even be aware that you're doing that.
Right.
Because it is so in the oxygen and the bloodstream. This is just how we are towards these people. This is just, and so I think that, Frank, I think you talked about, when we talked about this a long time ago, like suicide clusters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, these schools all of a sudden have like a fairly significant number of kids killing or attempting to kill themselves at once. And it's a multifaceted problem, but also it's this monoculture problem where you can't even really begin to examine how to get at the problem when you don't even understand, your place in it.
Right.
Yeah. And the clusters is an interesting thing because it's done a couple things that can be counterproductive to the whole topic of suicide prevention, which is it makes people feel like they can't talk about it. Right. Like, because all of a sudden, oh my God, this kid who everybody loved, I should actually get to this topic in a second. The kid that seemed to have everything going for them, right? Who was a good fit in their community. But so you have this kid and they end up taking their life, and we need to shut up about this. We can't give the other kids permission, right? Essentially. And that's not, from my understanding, the way that it works. Although there is a little bit of, I think there might be a little bit of the permission thing, right? Where it's like, well, if he couldn't do it, right, how am I going to do it? Right.
Right.
But what you need instead is tons of talk. You need everybody, all hands on deck, within reason, of course, being willing to talk about mental health and to talk about it in term and to take the stigma of not being able to talk about it, right? Away from the whole thing.
Because what a kid who's worried about, if a kid sees the popular kid who took his own life and says, well, if he couldn't make
he had
it,
everything.
Then how could I possibly?
Yeah,
If that kid is shut down from talking, that's going to be the only conversation in their mind, is the one that that negativity in their own brain is creating.
Right.
And the only counter to that is to create open space for that person to be able to talk about their own feelings openly and freely, and to hear other points of view and perspectives.
Because that kid, that type A kid, whatever, popular kid who took their own life, we covered that in the film as well. Because it accounts for about 15% of teen suicides. It comes from this. It's like everybody's super shocked, right? I mean, it's shocking when anybody takes their life, but it's this kid who's like, maybe they're like a really good athlete and popular and good student, and everything just seems like it's going right for them. But there's this crazy phenomenon where oftentimes that specific teen, everything's basically gone right for them so far, right? And
when something goes wrong,
it takes just oftentimes such a minor thing in their life to go wrong that something snaps in their head, and they've never practiced at plan B or plan C or whatever.
I think I know this kid. This is he survived, correct?
Yes.
And he is extraordinary, and you would never have guessed.
Never in a million years, right? And so he's in the film, and he tells his story, and the things, the two things that pushed him over the edge. He explains it as the effortless sort of, brilliance of him, right? was sort of like, was starting to wear off as like school started to get harder, as in his like junior and senior year, right?
Right.
Where you actually kind of finally had to start studying brilliant kid, right?
Right.
And so that was kind of starting to catch up with him a little bit. And then his girlfriend broke up with him, right? And then a couple days later, he wrecks the family car.
Oh.
And it was within 24 hours of wrecking the car that he had a plan, and he executed it.
Yeah, and he was basically, he'd never had anything bad happen to him until then.
Yeah.
And so two things at once, and he just was ill-equipped to handle it.
And so
this is why it was a defense mechanism for me to fail so much as a young person. I did a really good job, and that's why I'm the success I am today.
But there was another kid who unfortunately actually did take his life, who his story was really similar. We interviewed his mom and sister, and he was like this lacrosse star, right? And there are colleges out there that I guess will give scholarships for lacrosse. And he somehow, like, something just, I think it was maybe his GPA just wasn't quite high enough, or whatever it was. There was just this combination of things. He got into the school he really wanted to go to, but they didn't have a scholarship for him, right? And so he ends up having to kind of start looking for a plan B. And he doesn't really, the plan B wasn't that bad, right? But he doesn't really love it. It's just a different school and no scholarship. And he's just like, he had it all figured out in his head that he had to have a scholarship, right? He just he couldn't have his parents pay for his education. His parents were fairly well off. They could have afforded paying for his education, but he just had it. Nope. They can't pay for it. And over the course of it was like 48, 72 hours, he hatched a plan and unfortunately succeeded. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, you're terrorizing us.
Well, I think
but it's like, and so the point is that parents out there who might be listening, it is a terrifying thing, right? For a parent to think about even their seemingly perfect kid, right, who isn't safe from this topic, right?
Right.
This is you just have to have the conversations, right? And you have to be aware of what's going on. And
a lot of conversations.
Yeah. And be aware of the fact that they're probably not going to come to you, right? And if they're having a really hard time, with something and they're not used to it, right? It might be a good time just to check in and see how they're doing, right?
And I think this is, and we can wrap it up kind of with this because this is me getting my barb in, is that this is something I can lay again at the feet of the Mormon culture, and it's definitely not exclusive to Mormon culture, but it's a huge issue with it, is it's, in Mormon culture, it's not okay to not be okay.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that's true.
I think that that's a huge thing that, like, when you talked about these clusters of, suicide clusters where everybody just kind of shuts up about it and, watching the captain of the football team take his own life and that sort of thing. Like, we've got to kind of change. You got to check in, especially with our younger friends and our children, and just let them know it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
And they can talk about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And then,
are you okay, Frank?
I am okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I also think that it's really important to just acknowledge the thing that, or the fact that I was a documentary film producer on this. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have like all the right answers here. And what's also really important in any discussion in sort of media settings about suicide is that we share the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. That is if you call that number, like and I'm speaking directly to the listener, if you're thinking about suicide, you call the number. It's free, it's confidential, and it's also local. It's a national hotline. They've got offices all over the country, and that's where your call gets routed to. So you're able to talk to somebody who might understand your local situation a little bit better too. So, and it's confidential again. So,
and we'll put that in the show notes as well.
That's great. Yeah.
So,
yep. And we also, on our help page, if you go to our website, there's a link to a help page, and it has international numbers, and it also has information for the Trevor Project.
Oh, great.
So we'll include that.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Uncle Frank. That was
very enlightening.
It's a super important discussion. So let's move on.
Thank you so much.